Hello and good evening. We are going to have our last round of talks. Holy moly, I can't believe we're almost at the end. But if you want to stick around afterwards, we'll do some more facilitated networking. So please join us if you're keen, and we'll have our closing talks. So if I could please invite Lauren to stage, please. Hello. Oh, hi.
Oh, hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's so good to kind of re-meet you. So Lauren's going to be talking all about the circular economy, and I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thank you. So let me just share my screen. Great. Hopefully you can all see that. My name is Lauren. I'm the product manager at Wreath, which is a platform powering the transition to the circular economy. Thank you all for joining me today. And I genuinely mean that because I very much had a fear that nobody was going to turn up to my talk. So I'm very pleased that there are some people here. So 25 minutes of talking feels like a very long time. And who knows what's going to happen in that time. Probably my internet will drop out or I'll forget what I'm saying. But I can tell you that by the end of the talk, another 6,250 babies will have been born globally, give or take. You see what I did there? So why is that relevant? Because the global population is growing. UN data predicts that in another 80 years, the population will have reached 11 billion people, which is about 2.2 times what it was when I was born. And no, I'm not going to tell you when that was. But people love babies, which is why I've shamelessly included a picture of myself as a baby and my dad looking very stylish. So what's the problem? As the population increases, so does our rate of consumption of the world's finite natural resources. In the last 40 years alone, this consumption has tripled. Now, this is obviously an environmental problem. We're draining the planet of its resources, we're disrupting ecosystems, we're reducing biodiversity and creating hugely damaging waste and pollutants. But it's also an economic problem. This linear economy of take, make, waste is the established norm across the globe. And it's not surprising. Single use is convenient, but an economy based on the infinite consumption of finite resources can only ever be a short-term solution. That's not all. Aside from the ticking clock of linear resource consumption, there are other limitations to the existing model. It's wasteful. Even ignoring the environmental impact of that, as a business, waste means profit loss. So by leaking waste at each stage of your process, you're losing money. And with government plans to step up legislation, making producers more accountable for the cost of managing waste from their products, waste is about to become a lot more expensive, which is also indicative of a general shift towards more regulation and compliance to enforce sustainable practices. So waste is likely to keep getting more expensive. It's also risky. The volatility of both the price and the supply of resources and businesses' dependence on them means the supply chain is at the mercy of these fluctuations. Even as a consumer, I'm sure we've all felt the effects of this during COVID, with some products becoming completely unavailable or being sold for like 20 times their usual price because of the shock to the supply chain. These traditionally linear and often lengthy worldwide supply chains are particularly vulnerable to disruption. So now that we've had a brief idea of how the existing model isn't sustainable, what exactly is the alternative? Now, the title of the talk is a little bit of a spoiler, but to start fixing these problems, we need to transition away from the linear economy towards a circular one and really start to close that loop on our resource usage. A circular economy achieves three main things. One, it designs waste out of the process. Waste shouldn't just be an accepted byproduct. It's just an emblem of poor design. It keeps resources in continual play, so it means that we stop extracting more and more, and it regenerates natural systems. There are countless benefits to a circular economy. From an environmental perspective, it reduces waste, it's reducing the harmful extraction of natural resources, it reduces the carbon footprint from the import and export of those resources, but commercially, it does a lot. It future-proofs the economy by making it regenerative. It shortens the supply chains, making them inherently more stable. It removes the reliance on supply, which stabilizes cost, and it saves costs by designing products which retain their value. Now, it does all this by using sustainability principles of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with these principles, at least in isolation, but they need to be applied systemically and in the right balance. Often, sustainability solutions are placed just sort of on top of our current linear framework, and they tend to focus disproportionately on end-of-life patch fixes. So for instance, a common misconception is that single-use items, they're okay as long as they're recyclable, but this just isn't true. So over the past few years, studies have shown that our recycling system is really beginning to struggle. Where I live in London, 82% of all our household waste in 2017 and 18 was sent for incineration. So this includes the recycling that I personally painstakingly separate out and that I clean and hoard in my tiny flat and then lug down to the bins. 82% is going for incineration. But even if that system worked perfectly, many recyclable materials are downgraded in quality just through the process of recycling, making those materials just a little less pure and a little less valuable each time, which means there's a limit to how many times it can go through that process. Now, this is all sounding fairly depressing, which isn't completely fair, because when done properly and in the right context, recycling is incredibly valuable and a much better alternative to landfill or incineration. But the point is, it's just one tiny piece of the puzzle, which leads me to reuse. So imagine a world where single-use items are no longer the norm, where our everyday items have inherent and continued value. It's actually quite difficult to picture because single-use has become such a pervasive part of our culture. Just think about the number of single-use items you've used today, whether that's the container your shampoo came in, the tea bag from your morning cup of tea, the disposable face mask you wore on the bus. The point is, it's everywhere. Our world is designed for single use. Some of the biggest single-use offenders fall within packaging. According to the UK government, we use 5 million tons of plastic in the UK every year, nearly half of which is packaging. And that's just plastic packaging. I mean, it's clear that people are becoming more engaged with sustainability. You can see that in lifestyle changes and the products that we're buying. So why can't we get the products that we love in packaging that we love also? So reusable packaging isn't a new concept. The traditional milkman model is a perfect example of a reuse process. The milkman delivers the milk to your door in a reusable glass bottle and at the same time retrieves all your empties so they can be cleaned, refilled, and sent back out. This is reusable packaging. Now, obviously, that's a fairly simple example, and clearly reusable packaging and other reuse systems won't work for absolutely everything. But that still doesn't account for the incredibly low numbers of uptake. So why aren't there more businesses doing it? At Wreath, we set about trying to unpick this mystery. We emailed, phoned, stalked on social media, and eventually conducted a lot of interviews. And through these conversations, it became clear that regardless of industry and regardless of size, businesses encounter the same blockers for reuse. And the common denominator of those blockers is data, or the lack of it. So, for example, when an item is being reused, lifecycle data becomes far more important. Businesses need to be able to prove exactly what has happened to that specific item and when, and how many times that unit has been cleaned or used or refilled, and whether they're nearing any usage limits. This isn't just important for the safety of the customer, but also for compliance. Not having that data is a blocker. If their product is batch coded, they're legally required to know which batch is in which container at any given time, so the correct products can be recalled if necessary. Again, not having that data is a blocker. Businesses need to understand return on investment, especially as the initial outlay for more durable packaging tends to be that little bit pricier than single use. But the only comparable metric between how expensive your single-use packaging versus your reusable packaging is cost per use. It might cost 50 pence for the single-use container and £4 for the reusable one. But if the average usage of the container is 8 cycles, then actually you've halved your packaging costs. But even if you suspect the benefits, not having the data to prove its commercial viability is another blocker. So other than the trusty milk bottle, reusable packaging is still an emerging concept. We don't yet have the long-term data on durability and materials and even customer engagement to inform the design of that packaging, which means that businesses are currently having to make these decisions relatively blind. And as for the few who have built up some information, it's all happening in silos. So instead of learning with each other's experience and building on that knowledge to progress quickly, we're all just hitting the same barriers, but individually, which makes progress in the field much, much slower. Now, none of this is to say that businesses don't already capture huge amounts of data against their products. I've spent years working in product data, wrangling massive data sets just to enable us to sell the products online. But product data is only needed on a product level. Sure, we might sell 10,000 units of something, but digitally that is just one thing. However, if that product was in a reusable container, all of a sudden, every unit counts. Businesses need to be able to collect and store information unique to each individual asset. And without this digital infrastructure, it's almost impossible for businesses to make the shift to circular processes at scale. The bottom line is, without the right data, businesses lack the information they need to make decisions critical to adopting reuse. So at Wreath, we decided to try and solve this pickle. We developed a software solution which combines track and trace technology with our open data standard on reusable packaging. The purpose of the open data standard is to provide a common language, so a standardized way of creating and crucially sharing data. Essentially, this opens up a world of possibilities in the space for other people to come in and make use of it, to build cool tools and apps and other exciting solutions. So I really like this quote from City Mapper. If you make information accessible, someone will make good use of it and people will benefit. If you think about apps like City Mapper, it's only possible to do what they do because of open data. Their app is built from data which is funneled through TfL's open data standard. Not only can they access it, the data is in a standardized and therefore usable format. And so ultimately, data is at its most powerful when it's accessible. So how exactly does our software enable reuse? Well, we work with the businesses to embed a smart tracker on every reusable asset that they want to track. This tracker can be an RFID, a QR code, or a digital watermark. We're really not fussy. As long as it's machine readable, it can work with the system. That tracker is linked to a unique ID, a bit like a passport number. The user can then define exactly what data they want to track on the item, essentially creating a type of digital passport for every item. Once the item is in use, it gets scanned at different points throughout its life cycle, which in turn stamps its digital passport with whatever information the business wants to capture, eventually building a really rich library of usage data. By keeping an accurate digital audit trail of all the information important for businesses' environmental and commercial and compliance KPIs, we start dismantling those blockers, enabling the transition to a circular economy. And the really exciting bit, once businesses are no longer tied up worrying about blockers, they can start thinking about optimization. A system which provides complete visibility over your processes can also show you where it's breaking down, or at least where things could work better. All of a sudden, you can see exactly in the cycle where things are happening, how long it's taking, how good the return rate is, average reuse. This is all information that businesses can use continually to optimize their process. Did you know that in the brewery industry, they have a real problem with their stainless steel kegs just disappearing? Those steel kegs are intended to be reusable, and they're supposed to last for 30 years, but obviously that can't happen if they disappear throughout the cycle. And without tracking, they have no way of knowing for sure how big the problem is or where it's happening. I read one number which estimates that in the US, they lose about 400,000 kegs annually. And with a scrap price between $40 to $60 a keg, that gives you an idea of how much money we're talking just in that one use case. That level of financial loss could be enough to put some of the smaller breweries completely out of business. Without the digital infrastructure to support these circular processes, often they're not commercially viable, or at the very least, it just isn't worth taking the risk to find out. There is potential for the adoption of circular economy practices in almost every industry. I've been speaking today predominantly about reusable packaging, but that's just one example. We're already rolling out a trial with an NHS trust to explore how we can mitigate the massive explosion of single-use PPE since COVID. This year in one NHS trust alone, they used 120 times more single-use face masks than last year, which when you extrapolate those numbers out, it's really quite frightening. We're also looking at the feasibility of applying our reuse system to the lighting remanufactured supply chain to help with the problem of waste electrical and electronic equipment, which has the rather fun acronym of WE. Not that that's the reason why we're doing it, but we've estimated that there's the potential to save over 60 tons of e-waste annually just by partnering with this one SME. Now, I could continue to list industry examples, but I think you probably get the idea. What is clear is that things do need to change, and individual change can still be powerful, but to fix a global problem, the change needs to be systemic. And at Wreath, we're building the digital infrastructure to support that.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Are there any questions? I was like, it's the real deal. Any questions? Sorry, I've got. Yo, great.
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh,
I'm really curious. I got us back on track.
I missed that. Sorry, she's being loud. Thank you so much, Lauren. It was so great to have you, and I'm just thrilled to see what you and Claire are doing, and her other
and Emily.
Lauren's other co-founder is a longtime Ideas List member and actually helped run our conference 2 years ago. So thank you so much. What we're going to do now, everybody, is we are going to bring everybody back into this room again. So you all can stay here. And then we'll have another couple rounds of networking, and we'll go from there. Sound good? So we'll start in 2 or 3 minutes. Actually, we'll have final talks, final words, and then a couple minutes of networking. Thanks.